Every Christmas Eve growing up, my father read the Christmas story to us from Luke 2 in the King James Version. And every Christmas Eve, I thought I understood it. I largely did, but I now see little things that I was missing through no fault of my own, nor of the King James translators, but simply because of the inevitable process of language change. The King James Version is 400 years old, after all. I now see these little things I missed, because I focused hard on them while writing my book, Authorized, The Use and Misuse of the King James Bible, Lexham Press 2018. Here are 5 things you might not have noticed that you were missing in the Christmas story in Luke 2 in the King James Version. First, the very first sentence of the Christmas story in Luke 2 contains a fairly good example of a word that no longer means what it used to mean. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. It's a tiny bit unclear what the King James translators were doing with this word taxed, no matter how simple it seems. They were excessively smart men, and they had to know that the Greek word that they were translating here refers to census registration, not to the levying of taxes. By choosing the word taxed, they were following William Tyndale from 1526 and the Bishop's Bible of 1568, which is the version they were revising. The King James revised that at the request of the king. But I don't think that any of them made a mistake. It's possible they chose what we now call a functional translation. They thought the point of the census was for taxes, as well it may have been, so they translated accordingly. It's also possible that they were using a sense of the word taxed that is no longer available to us in contemporary English. The authoritative and exhaustive Oxford English Dictionary, the only dictionary that traces the full history of English, rather than merely describing its current state, which is the job of most dictionaries, gives weight to that second possibility. Look at sense 8 for the verb tax, used to render the Greek word apographane, to enter a list, to register, enroll, enter in a list or statement of property. And it's marked as obsolete or rare. And all the examples are from editions of Tyndale's New Testament. This is well before the King James. Joseph and Mary did not go to Bethlehem to pay taxes, but instead to register for a census. In part, yes, for tax purposes, we assume. The Common English Bible of 2011 actually renders this word enrolled in the tax lists. But modern readers misunderstand taxed because we don't and can't use that word that way. This sense is not in our English like it was apparently in theirs, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. Many people know that Luke 2:1 refers to a census or registration because it's been explained to them in sermons or books. But what they don't realize is that the King James translators, at least according to the smart folks at the Oxford English Dictionary, did not make a mistake. They used a different sense of the word tax. Second, and this is a minor distinction, though that's what we do on this channel, when Luke says there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the fields in Luke 2:8, the country he was referring to was not Israel, the country, the nation of Israel. Instead, he was talking about the region around Bethlehem. We still say things like, we drove through some beautiful Ohio farm country, but none of the major modern English translations of the Bible opt for the word country in Luke 2:8. The closest they come is countryside in the New Jerusalem Bible, which isn't exactly super prominent. The most common choice of modern translators is the word region. But if you look up country in the Oxford English Dictionary, you will see a very interesting sense that is no longer available to English speakers, and yet may be, and I think is, what the King James translators meant originally. The territory immediately outside a walled town or city, etc. The environs, and they mark this as obsolete. Could the King James translators have used a sense of country that referred to the fields just outside Bethlehem? It sure fits the context really well, and the word. Where else were the shepherds likely to be but just outside the confines of the city? And it makes sense that we would no longer have this sense of the word country because we don't tend to need it. Cities haven't been walled for a long, long time. Third, my fingers are cold, the shepherds in the environs of Bethlehem saw a multitude of the heavenly host praising God in Luke 2:13. I talked about this word for a good little while in my book, Authorized. a host is an army. That's what host meant in 1611 when the King James Version was first translated and published. That's what the Greek word here means too. But we no longer use the word host to mean army. We use it to mean someone who entertains guests. He was the host of an elegant dinner party. Or, and this is what most people probably hear in Luke 2:13, we use host to mean a whole lot of something. But multitude already told us that. The King James translators were not trying to communicate a multitude of a heavenly whole lot of something. I don't blame the King James translators here. What they did was absolutely and perfectly fine in the year 1611. It's not a sin to be ignorant of the future of the English language. And I don't blame people today for failing to keep track of all the minutest elements of the history of English. They shouldn't have to do this to read their Bibles. In fact, several modern translations actually do stick with host. I don't really think they should, but it's not a huge deal. But Tyndale himself went with soldiers, spelled Sowdiers, as did the Geneva Bible of 1599 with its Soulders. God the Father didn't just send a whole lot of angels. He sent an army of angels, a militant array of angels, in order to make this special, joyous announcement. Fourth, the shepherds, having seen the baby Jesus, were eager to tell others about their experience. And all they that heard it, the King James says, wondered at the things which were told them by the shepherds. That's Luke 2:18. The King James Version translators did not mean that they were merely curious. That's the way wondered is most commonly used today. In 1611, the word meant to be struck with surprise or astonishment, to marvel. That's from the Oxford English Dictionary, by the way, my favorite resource for this sort of things. The word can be used that way today, but my sense is that this is not common enough to be clear to many readers. Everyone who heard this news was amazed. That's what the contemporary English translations tend to say there. Fifth, and finally, one of the obsolete senses of the verb keep in the OED is to take in with the eyes, ears, or mind, to take note of, to mark, behold, observe. This may be what the King James translators meant when they said Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. I'm not really totally sure. Maybe they did just mean what we would mean with kept. She retained possession of certain memories. But modern translations don't follow the King James Version here. Most go for Mary treasured all these things. One of the difficulties of reading any literature from the Elizabethan era is that it's actually really challenging, even with the help of a dictionary and the guidance of whatever the Greek and Hebrew means, to put yourself in the shoes of the original Elizabethan readers. It's hard to forget what you know a word means in your English and read the text of the King James Version like the Elizabethans would. Over time, languages change on multiple levels. Some words have dropped out of English. These are words that we know we don't know. These are words like, we don't say besom, we say broom. We don't say immerse, we say fine. And chambering is now called immorality. If you read the King James, you'll notice these dead words, and it's nobody's fault that we don't know these words. Again, how could the King James translators have known what words would fall out of use? But sometimes changes in English lead to actual misinterpretation, and that's what we must guard against. There are words in the King James that we don't know because we still use them, but those words mean different things today. But often that modern sense seems to make sense in context and we don't notice our misunderstanding. These I call false friends. And they're nobody's fault. Language just does this. You shouldn't feel dumb any more than you should feel dumb for not knowing Sanskrit. But now, I'll bet thou understandest what thou readest in the King James Version a little better. Just in time for Christmas. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good whatever it is in your time zone.